For joining us today. I'm Princess Brian, and I'm here joined with former United States Representative and politician Beto O'Rourke. Thank you for joining us today.
Princess, thanks for having me.
So tell me a little bit, what brings you to Amarillo?
I'm back in Amarillo after just having been here last month, where we held a big town hall where we welcomed Republicans, Independents, Democrats, everyone to come together and focus on how we're going to get this country and our state back. And here we are a month later, this time joined by Senator Bernie Sanders and Congressman Greg Casar and other local leaders to continue the work on the same. Because places like Amarillo far too often are an afterthought for the Democratic Party, if they're even thought about at all. You have these extraordinary local leaders who've been carrying the weight and the burden on their shoulders this whole time. So it's wonderful when you have people like Senator Sanders show up and add their voice and their energy to this fight, and no longer write off these parts of the state. Just to give you an example, the consequences, in 2024, Ronnie Jackson didn't even have an opponent on the ballot. That's a congressman that Democrats can beat with a message of expanding Medicaid, of raising the minimum wage, of stopping these endless wars in the Middle East, including this new one we're about to get into in Iran. But in order to do that, we have to field candidates, we have to have that local support, and we have to have the energy of the Democratic Party, not just here in Potter and Randall County, but across the state and across the country.
And tell me about the tour that Senator Sanders is taking. He's kind of picking cities that are those more conservative cities across the country. Why is that important?
You know, I feel like the Democratic Party over the course of my lifetime started to write off whole sections of this country. And so we can't blame voters in places like the Panhandle or these other places that the senator is visiting for not choosing Democrats if Democrats have not chosen them. So it's high time that we show up again and we listen to one another and we fight right alongside each other for the things that really matter to us in our lives. You know, making sure that you can see a doctor, making sure that our local schools are funded so that our teachers don't have to work 2 or 3 jobs just to make ends meet, raising the minimum wage in Texas from $7.25 an hour to something that you can live on by only working 1 job and have time to spend with your kids or go to the movies or take a vacation. These are just common sense bread and butter issues that Democrats stand for. But if Democrats aren't showing up and helping the local Democrats here in Amarillo, then we can't be surprised that Democrats continue to lose. So my hat's off to Senator Sanders and everybody else who is in this fight doing the right thing and not just going to the easy, typical, regular places that you typically see Democrats. We've got to show up everywhere and fight for everyone.
And talking about the local Democratic Party, here in Amarillo, it is a little bit of a smaller group when you compare it to the Republican Party. Tell me, why do you want to still let them know that you're here and that their voices are heard when it comes to that?
I'll tell you what, I'm one of the few people who's been to each one of the 254 counties in Texas. And I can tell you that the leadership that we have here on the ground in Potter and Randall County is second to none. It really doesn't matter if the Texas Democratic Party or the Democratic National Committee haven't invested the resources in the High Plains. You have people like Julianne Fulton and Carmen Seberg who have taken it upon themselves to organize other volunteers in these communities and really score some important victories, like ensuring that there is something closer to reproductive health care access in this part of the state and beating back laws that would deeply hurt and harm the women who live in this area. They're also giving energy and excitement to prospective candidates in 2026. And I think we might see some surprises on election night in November of next year, thanks to the work that they're doing. But I think the big message is they can't do it by themselves, and we shouldn't expect them to do it alone. Those of us who live in other places, myself in El Paso, Senator Sanders all the way out in Vermont, by showing up here, by bringing additional energy, excitement, and enthusiasm, we're going to help build upon what they've already established, and we're going to do that everywhere, not just in Amarillo, not just in certain places, but all 254 counties of Texas, all 50 states across this country.
And you were just here, we were talking about it about a month ago in Amarillo. Tell me, how does the message you're delivering today differs from that one?
You know what, I'm listening to the people that I want to work for and that I want to serve. You know, hearing from a young mother with a 12-year-old child who goes to school in the Canyon ISD, who's worried about cuts to the IDEA program, cuts to local schools thanks to Greg Abbott's voucher scam, and what that means for her 12-year-old daughter with disabilities. We've got to fight for her. Meeting a business owner here who is worried about what tariffs are going to do to her and her ability to keep people employed and to stay in business after 30 years. And the farmers and the ranchers and the growers and the producers who put the food on our table, who are just getting smashed by this administration and are struggling to survive. We've got to fight for them as well. So those are all messages that I will be repeating and reflecting, messages that I heard by coming to Amarillo first. I think the only way the Democrats are going to get back into political power is not by talking down to or talking at people that they want to work with and whose votes they want to win, but by listening to them and allowing them to lead and for their voices to describe the message that ultimately is going to produce the victories that this country so desperately needs.
And you touched on the administration. Tell me about the administration on the state level and kind of the issues that you see with this so far.
Well, here we are in the least insured state in America, one of the last to not take Medicaid expansion, which is ironic because this state, through Lyndon Baines Johnson in 1965, actually came up with the Medicaid program in the first place. But what that means, Princess, is that you have children who are dying of diabetes faster and more than you have in any other state. We are the epicenter for a maternal mortality crisis that is 3 times as deadly for Black women in the state of Texas. In other words, we have people who aren't healthy enough or well enough to finish their education or go to work or raise their kids or do whatever God placed them on this planet to perform in the first place. And that is not right. That's a decision that's made at the state level. The defunding of our local schools through this voucher scam, that's hurting teachers and educators and administrators. And most importantly, it's hurting kids. It's hurting the future of this state that we so desperately depend on. These are decisions that are being made at the state level. And lastly, the casual cruelty that we see against vulnerable populations, whether they're immigrants or the LGBTQ community or women in the state of Texas. That's not the Texas way. I'm a lifelong Texas, born and raised in this state. That's not who we are. We are so much better than this, but we got to fight for it. And I'm looking forward to a Democratic Party that will fight for these values and will fight for every single Texan and won't submit and won't roll over and won't play nice when the other side is playing for all the marbles on the table. That's what today in this rally with Bernie Sanders and the local Potter and Randall County Democratic parties is all about.
And you talk about fighting and having to pit that fight in Texas. Tell me, where does that fight come from with you? Because you were once in office, but you kind of take this step back from that. Why are you continuing to fight?
You know, whether I'm in office and I was a member of Congress for 6 years, whether I'm a candidate and I've run for statewide office in the state of Texas, or whether I'm a private citizen and a volunteer, which is the words that describe me now, these issues and these fights are just as important. And just because your name is not on the ballot, just because you don't hold a title, doesn't mean that you get a pass and you step back. In a democracy, in a government of, by, and for the people, all of this is on all of us. And we each must ask ourselves what we can do with what we have just where we are at this moment of truth. Because if we don't stand up to be counted, if we don't push back and resist and ultimately overcome this corrupt, criminal, craven, incompetent administration, then it will mark the end of what Lincoln called the last best hope of earth. And Princess, our forefathers and foremothers for 248 years have been able to keep this thing going. I don't want to be the generation that loses it. So whatever it takes from me, whatever it takes from all of us, we've got to do all we can.
And you talked about the administration. Let's move to the national level. President Trump just announced the strikes that happened in Iran. Tell me, what was your initial reaction to that?
This is an illegal war, and it's not lost on me, and I don't think it's lost on the American people, including those who voted for Donald Trump, that this guy, when he was running for president in 2024, promised that he would be the president of peace, that he would be the president who would end these wars and not start them. Look, every single war that we've entered by choice, Vietnam, Afghanistan, Iraq, has ended up badly hurting this country, costing the lives of tens of thousands of American service members and hundreds of thousands of people from around the world. These never end well. And yet here we are entering yet another war in the Middle East. This war is illegal. Only the United States Congress has the power to declare war, and the United States Congress has not done this. In other words, the American people have not had a say on dealing death and destruction and potentially receiving the same from Iran, because Iran gets a vote and gets to take action in this war just as well as the United States. So I'm deeply disappointed in what the president has done. I think there is a peaceful, diplomatic, negotiated solution to the challenges that we face. We don't have to go to war. It's illegal, and the American people should resist this until we stop it.
And when President Trump announced that, some of his Republican counterparts were kind of taken aback that it happened. What was your reaction? Were you taken aback or surprised that he did this?
You know, the president had been saying that he might very well use military force against Iran. So I don't know that this can come as a surprise to us, but I think it continues the lawlessness of this administration, the corruption, the criminality, the disregard for the Constitution and the rule of law, the hallmarks of America. Now, you can be a Republican, you can be an independent, you can be a Democrat. What I think we can all agree on is that we are a country governed by the rule of law. There are no kings, there are no tyrants, there's just government of, by, and for the people. And by illegally taking this action and committing the lives of U.S. service members, taking the lives of people in another country in our name, in the name of America, starting a war, and look, by definition, wars are unpredictable. We do not know how they will end, but we know this much for sure. When we start wars of choice, when we have not been attacked first, as we were at Pearl Harbor during World War II, when we start these wars of our own volition, they almost never end well. I would challenge anybody who's watching this right now to think of a time where we began a war of choice and where it ended well for this country. We're still trying to wrap up the wars that we started decades ago. And as the veterans in this community know full well, we struggle to fund the care, the service-connected disability payments, the resources needed at the VA to take care of everybody who's already fought and put their lives on the line for the wars that we've already committed to. So the last thing this country needs is to start a war, especially a war of choice, especially when it's very possible that we can resolve the issue at hand, Iran's approach to having nuclear weapons, through a negotiated, peaceful solution.
And you mentioned no kings. We just had that protest nationally last weekend. Tell me, what was your reaction to that? Have you seen something to that magnitude before across the nation?
I'm so proud of what Amarillo did. You know, the people who showed up by the hundreds, perhaps by the thousands in this community, they weren't just Democrats. They weren't just Republicans. They weren't just independents. They are people who in some cases have never voted before, have never been politically involved. In other cases are too young to vote right now, but they understand the moment of truth that we're in. They understand that what we do or fail to do right now will decide the future of this country. And they're not going to be found wanting. They're going to take action. So whether it's here in Amarillo, in my hometown of El Paso, or in thousands of cities across the country, we saw everyday Americans rise up against the tyranny and the would-be king in Donald Trump and so many of the illegal, corrupt activities of this administration. And yes, it gives me hope. It's inspiring. It's cause for optimism as we move forward. These are very dark days. We are on a very difficult, a very tough road, but we have to take some hope in what we saw during those No Kings protests.
And what would you say to the public who's losing that hope? How can they kind of gain that back?
You know what? If you think about who we are, what we're made of, where we've come from, we don't have the luxury of losing hope. When we threw off the British Empire 250 plus years ago, we didn't have the luxury of losing hope. When we ended the institution of slavery, 300,000 plus Union soldier lives given to end that institution and to realize that promise that all men are created equal and should be treated equally under the law, we didn't have the luxury of losing hope. In the fight for civil rights and voting rights in the 1950s and the 1960s, we did not lose hope. We continued to fight until we won the Civil Rights Act of 1964, the Voting Rights Act of 1965. And so we cannot lose hope now at this moment of truth. We've got to do everything that we can. And it's not easy, but it's never been easy in this country. The things worth winning and worth achieving are always going to take the maximum effort that we can give. But I'm optimistic based on what I see across this state, across this country, and especially right here in Amarillo.
In talking about across the country, have you seen something like this, your time in office or watching politics, everybody kind of taking a stand against the current administration?
I've never seen anything like this before. I mean, on the one side, I've never seen this level of illegality that we're seeing in the Trump administration, absolutely defying the courts, the Constitution, the rule of law. And let's remember, those service members whose lives are on the line right now in Iran, they swore an oath not to a president or a political party or a person in power, but to the Constitution. Mm-hmm. The rule of law reigns supreme in this country, and this president is breaking it every day, and he's breaking it with this illegal war in Iran. What we're seeing in response to that is encouraging. People aren't accepting this. They're not rolling over. They're not submitting it. Whatever the leaders in the Democratic Party might be doing or might be failing to do, everyday Americans, the real people here in Amarillo, are rising up. They're standing up to be counted. They're raising their voices to be heard, and it's really making a difference. And I think that bodes well to produce the public pressure necessary to stop some of this illegal behavior on the part of our president. I think it bodes well for Democrats' chances in 2026 to win political power so we can stop some of these things from the state legislature or from the United States Congress. And I think it bodes well for this country continuing this really proud tradition of being a democracy, a constitutional republic of men and women who are governed by the rule of law, not kings, not tyrants, not illegal administrations like the current one.
And when you're speaking today, you're going to be mostly speaking to the Democratic Party, but there may be a few people who are registered Republicans also in the audience. What would you like to say to that party? Does your message differ?
My message is for this country to make it, we need a true united front. We need the broadest possible coalition. So if you voted for Donald Trump, you are welcomed in this coalition. Same goes for you if you voted for Kamala Harris. If you didn't vote at all last time, we're here to listen to you, to work with you, to fight alongside you, and to get it right so that we give you a reason to vote in 2026. Look, there's no magic amount of money. There's no magic message. There's nothing we can do at a distance on social media that's going to fix this. Mm-hmm. This requires showing up, meeting with, listening to people where they are. And that's why I'm in Amarillo again here today. That's why Bernie Sanders and Kendall Scudder and Greg Casar and so many others have come to this great community to listen, to be with, to work with, and to fight right alongside our fellow Americans to get this country back.
And we were talking about you're doing another leg of tours and stopping a few other places across the state. Where are those places?
So later today, we'll be in Fort Worth with Senator Sanders. A little bit later this week, I'm going to be in San Antonio and then in Laredo, then in Tyler, Texas and East Texas, and then we'll be in Beaumont in the southeast part of the state. We're going to go everywhere. We are for everyone. We're not going to write anybody off, and we're not going to take anyone for granted. You cannot be too red or too rural for us to care. You can't be too big and too blue for us to stop showing up. I think the problem the Democratic Party has had is that it has stopped being for everyone. It's focused on 7 swing states that are nowhere close to Texas. Mm-hmm. We need to be in places like Texas. And then when we're in Texas, yes, Dallas and Austin and San Antonio and Houston, they're really important. We got to be there. But we got to be in Amarillo. We got to be in Lubbock. We got to be in Armstrong County. We got to be in Hall. We got to be in Leon down in the southeast part of the state. We've got to show up everywhere for everyone. That is the path back to power.
And finally, as people are seeing the news, there's a new headline every day in this political climate. What would you like them to kind of know and how to push forward?
You know, this current president is a master of distraction. You know, the moment that you seize on something that he has done that is illegal or is hurting the people around us, he'll try to distract you with a proposal to invade Greenland or adopt Canada as the 51st state or to seize the Panama Canal through use of force. We've got to stay focused on one another, on the people who are being hurt, on the fact that food deliveries to our food banks here in Amarillo have been cut down dramatically by this president, that our local schools are closing right here. 3 schools are closing in Amarillo as we speak because we're defunding local schools for this voucher scam. That we're about to commit the young men and women of this country to yet another war in the Middle East. These are the important things that really matter. We've got to stay focused on them. We've got to continue to resist, to fight back, to stand up and protest, to shape public perception, to form the political will necessary to stop the bad things, and to elect good people into positions of public trust so that we can take care of one another and really serve and deliver for the people that we care about.
Alrighty, that is everything. Thank you for joining us today.
Thank you very much.
All right.